Some crimes are solved in days. Others drag on for years, collecting dust, doubt, and frustration until a trail finally goes cold. But then there are the cases that defy all logic. Cases that feel less like crimes and more like riddles. Cases that keep detectives awake long after they've hung up their badge. This is one of them. It begins with a house. A two-story Victorian home on the corner of Maple and Ash in a quiet suburban town. Built in the early 1900s, it once stood proud. White paint gleaming, a wraparound porch filled with flowers, children playing in the yard. But by the late 1980s, it had fallen into disrepair. Peeling paint, overgrown grass, windows that rattled in the wind. The neighbors whispered about it even before tragedy struck. They said the place had an uneasy feeling, but no one could have predicted what would happen inside. They call it the locker room case. It was the spring of 1989. 16-year-old Emily Carter lived in that house with her parents. By all accounts, she was a bright, thoughtful teenager, quiet, studious, with dreams of one day becoming a writer. She filled notebooks with poems, stories, and diary entries about her daily life. On the night of April 12th, Emily went upstairs to her bedroom. She told her parents she was finishing homework and would join them later. Her mother knocked on her door just before midnight. No answer. She assumed Emily had fallen asleep. The next morning, the door was still closed, still locked. Her parents knocked again and again. Silence. Panic set in. Finally, her father called the police. When officers arrived, they forced the door open, and what they found would haunt them for decades. Emily was lying on her bed, lifeless. The coroner would later determine she had suffered blunt force trauma, but the exact weapon was never identified. What baffled police most wasn't just her death. It was the scene itself. The door was locked from the inside. The key was still in the lock. The windows were sealed shut, their paint crusted and unmoving. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No footprints. Nothing disturbed except for the girl on the bed. It was as if she had been killed in a room that no one else could possibly have entered. Detective Samuel Harper, a 29-year-old investigator recently assigned to homicide, was called to the scene. He would later say, "I thought I'd seen everything a small town could throw at me. Suicides, domestic disputes gone bad. But nothing prepared me for this. When I walked into that room, I knew it would never leave me, because none of it made sense." Police worked relentlessly. They tested the lock repeatedly. Could it be manipulated from the outside? They couldn't replicate it. They checked the siding outside the windows. No scuffs, no handholds. They pried at the paint sealing the window frames. It would have taken hours and left obvious evidence if someone had forced them. They crawled into the vents, searching for access points. They pried up floorboards. They sent officers into the crawl spaces. Nothing. The room was a sealed box. And yet, Emily Carter was dead. Then came the diary. Hidden beneath her mattress, police found a small leather-bound book. The first entries were innocent. Notes about school, complaints about homework, scribbles about friends and crushes. But gradually, the tone grew darker. One entry read, "He's back. I see him at night, standing in the corner of my room, watching. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but when I close my eyes, I hear him breathing." Another, written just 3 nights before her death. "I don't know who he is, but he whispers my name. He says he'll never leave me." The press got wind of the diary. They branded him the man in the shadows. Soon, the town was gripped with fear. Parents kept their children indoors. Teenagers dared each other to walk past the house at night. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said Emily was imagining things. Others swore the house was haunted. Detective Harper tried to stay grounded. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in facts. But every theory his team tested fell apart. Harper later admitted it was like chasing a ghost. And every time we thought we had something, it slipped right through our fingers. Months passed. Leads dried up. The Carter family, heartbroken, eventually moved away. The house was sold, then abandoned when no one could bear to live in it. The case went cold. Evidence box filed away, forgotten by most, but not by Harper. Even after his retirement, the locked room haunted him. Then, in 2015, nearly 3 decades later, the case was reopened. A new team of investigators decided to re-examine the evidence with modern forensic tools. And that's when things began to shift. One detective studied the brass key found in the lock. Under ultraviolet light, faint scratches appeared on the metal. Scratches that suggested the lock hadn't simply been turned from the inside. It had been manipulated from the outside. But how? Investigators went back to the original blueprints of the house. And there, they discovered something shocking. Behind Emily's bedroom wall was a narrow vertical cavity, a forgotten service corridor dating back to the home's construction. In the early 1900s, wealthy families built such corridors so servants could move unseen through the house. Most entrances had been sealed decades earlier, but not all of them. Down in the basement, hidden behind a shelf, they found a panel. Behind that panel was a passageway, a cramped, dust-choked tunnel that led directly to Emily's room. For 30 years, the answer had been hidden in the walls. When detectives entered the passage, their flashlights revealed smudges on the plaster, faint fingerprints, preserved by decades of still air. Forensic testing matched them to a man named Charles Danning. Danning had been a handyman who worked on the house during renovations in the late 1980s. He had died years earlier, never once a suspect. But evidence suggested he had discovered the hidden corridor and exploited it. He had been inside the walls, watching, waiting, slipping silently in and out of Emily's room. Her diary hadn't been fantasy. The man in the shadows was real. And the lock? Experts now believe Danning had crafted a thin tool to manipulate it from a hidden passage. From outside the room, he could lock the door, leaving it to appear as though it had been sealed from within. The room wasn't locked to keep him out. It was locked to keep her cries from reaching anyone who could save her. When police revealed these findings, the town was stunned. For decades, people whispered about ghosts and curses. But the truth was far darker. The monster had never been supernatural. He had been human, flesh and blood. A man who hid in the walls of a teenage girl's home. Detective Harper, now gray-haired and frail, returned to the house one final time. He walked the narrow upstairs hallway, cane tapping against the wooden floor, until he reached the door that had haunted him for 30 years. He placed a hand on the tarnished brass knob and whispered. We thought it was unsolvable, but the truth was always here. We just didn't know where to look. He bent slowly, placed a single rose at the base of the door, and whispered again, his voice breaking. She deserved better. May she finally rest. The house was silent. Still, but for the first time, it felt as if its secret had finally been spoken aloud. Justice had come late, but it had come. And as the narrator's voice closes the story, it carries both a warning and a truth. Justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes, the truth hides in silence, waiting for someone brave enough to look again. Never dismiss the voices of the vulnerable, and never assume the impossible cannot be explained. Because in the end, monsters don't vanish into thin air. They hide. And sometimes they hide in the walls around us.